Hello everyone, and welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. Today, I'm going to attempt to paint a fish in watercolor. In front of me, I have a quarter sheet of Stonehenge Aqua, and it is the back of a painting, actually. So, kind of just been experimenting and playing around with the fish. And one of the things that I wanted to really experiment was the background in itself. So I'm going to saturate the paper. I'm going to apply some colors. I kind of crowdsourced some questions from some Facebook pages. And some people are saying, leave the fish as it is. Some people are saying, kind of do a splatter. And some said light blue wash. And one person even recommended a blue wash with maybe salt texture, which I thought was a really great idea. So I had blue wash suggestions, greenish wash, etc. So here's ultramarine with a little bit of burnt sienna in it, a little bit of lemon yellow. I'm going to wash this on. I'll let the paper stretch. It's starting to buckle, so I'll press that up. Let's see if there's anywhere else I really want to go with this. A little bit more lemon yellow. I'm using the large hake brush. I don't usually use this for painting, more for just the wash application. But I am starting to lose hairs from this brush. Just pushing those off. Okay, so that's the wash. I have my salt right here. I think I'm going to let it dry a little bit and then apply the salt. Plus we'll have the granulation from the ultramarine as well for some more texture. All right, so here we have the salt. I know you could apply salt at different stages of wetness. I did dry just a tad bit, but I'm not proficient at this salt texture. I'm not sure if I needed more pigment or not. We'll let it try to soak up some of that, add some texture. Then we'll do a dry off and we'll start painting our fish. Okay, so the paper's dry. If you look closely, you can see the salt granules and how it absorbs some water around it, so it does have that texture there. I'm going to pause the camera and just use a soft brush to wipe this off over the garbage. Okay, all salt granules are removed. I had to use a soft brush, like I mentioned. I pretty much had to kind of push in this fashion to get that salt to really come off of there. But we do have some texture, and we can now jump into painting the fish. So I'm going to use a very large brush for this. I think any type of mop brush would work. I haven't tried it with the hake brush yet, but this is about over a 2-inch long goat hair, synthetic hair, or sheep hair, synthetic hair mix. And I'm going to mix burnt sienna and ultramarine. And with these brushes, I found that I have to really get a lot of water going on them whenever I'm using them on Western watercolor paper. And I'm going to kind of get the idea of the fish on there. I have a picture of a red fish on the side. How true to that I'm going to stay, I don't know. But it's more just kind of the gestural, the ideas, the texture that I'm looking for and working with currently. I'm still in that kind of exploratory learning phase. And what inspired this was I follow some Chinese art suppliers on Facebook, And honestly, I highly recommend doing that because they'll post like time lapses and videos of Chinese brush painting, flowers, fish, etc. And this is what this one's inspired by, one of those time lapses. And it was kind of just an ink drawing, but I've been trying to modify it to Western watercolors. So I'm going to start with kind of above where the eye would be for the fish. This is the back ridge, and then it kind of tapers down to a point to the tail. And then this region will go into the tail itself. Now, if you don't have a brush like this, you can use maybe a squirrel mop. You could also mix in a rigger, let's see, let me show you. Something like this, kind of just a small brush for these lines. I am going to try to get a thin point with this. Okay, come out there, come out towards the mouth, and here's the mouth opening. And there's that bottom jaw. Have that. Out and around. Then it's kind of that gill action coming through. Then we'll start going on the underbelly. And fish always seem to have kind of a pouch area right in here before it tapers to the tail. I may be making the head too large in proportion to the rest of the body, but it's just trying to get that idea there. And it tapers to the tail. Now the tail, come out from there. This is a stronger mix of the burnt sienna and ultramarine. And I've noticed that with tails, they do seem to kind of want to bring that shadow, that piece across under that bottom there. The fins along the bottom and the back, I could kind of get just the gestural strokes. On top, there's kind of those spines. And that'll come down the back into another series and then another series. Then from here, we're going to have the fin alongside the body. I'm going to wind up passing over all this again, but right now it's just me kind of mapping everything out. I'm going to draw around a circle. That's where the eye is going to be. I'm going to bring some of this color down. Now, since I'm painting watercolor, it's going to start blending everything together, which I think is okay at this point, because now I'm going to start going back and forth trying to build things up. The inside of that mouth right there. That back ridge. Okay. I'm going to grab the #1 rigger, if I can find it. I think I had taken out. Yes. Now with this, I can mix a nice dark, and so far we're just staying within those two colors of ultramarine and the burnt sienna. And these slight curved lines will help give a roundness as well as scales. So we go one curved direction, and then to create the scales, we then kind of come straight down, and as they crisscross, take that. We are quite wet right now, So we're going to have to build up. Ultramarine and burnt sienna. I'm trying to stay as little color-wise as possible. Let's darken that top of the back. Now, one interesting thing about fish is that you'll notice their backs are usually darker and their bellies are whiter. Reason being is that if you were a predator fish and you're swimming underneath a fish, hunting, if you look up, you're going to see a brighter sky. And that brighter belly helps that fish blend in with the top of the water when the predator fish is looking up. I'm just lifting some texture right now. I'm lifting that white underbelly. And then the top of the fish, if you look down into water, water is usually dark and murky. That dark will help it blend in when looking down. So kind of keep that in mind. An even stronger mix. Eventually, I may add some like yellows or yellow ochre into this for the actual kind of fish scale color. But right now, this kind of two-color combination is just working off the bat. Those spines. I could even come in and get those guys a little bit darker. This guy a little bit more pronounced. Darken around there. And with yesterday's experiment, the main thing that I kind of focused on was the lifting and then the darks, the shadows, where everything would kind of cast a shadow against the body or try to give the roundness to the body. In fact, I'm going to mix a little bit of Payne's gray in just to add even more tonal depth up there. We could add raw sienna. I think I mentioned yellow ochre, but let's try raw sienna to kind of start giving a little bit more life to the fish. The scales that I put in are kind of gone at this point, so that might be revisited in a few. It's just a lot of pushing wet and wet around and still learning how these fishes are put together. And re-wetting that bottom allows me to lift it even lighter, and that'll help give that curvature. I'll go for a stronger dark for where the bottom part of that fin will be, casting a shadow against the body. And even though I'm wet and wet, I can accentuate some of those lines that I put in the beginning. And that really seems to help create these dimensions. The inside of the mouth. And feeding wet and wet for those splines. calling them splines, but I don't think that's the right word. Within the skateboarding stuff that I've been doing online, changing what's called the kingpin out on some of those skateboards. The pins have these lines kind of like that in them, and I think they're there to help hold them in place. And everybody's been calling them splines, but I'm not really a mechanically inclined person, so I'm not sure what the correct terminology is. Maybe a little too dark coming down. So the paper towel on the back and forth really does help with this. The granulation effect within the Payne's Ultramarine helps as well. And I can grab that number 1 rigger again and go back in with that idea, those lines that I talked about for the scales. Do one kind of curved and one kind of straight so that when they crisscross, we'll get that effect there. I am going to lift a dot out of the tail, and then I'm going to come in with a black for kind of that dot that you'll see on a tail of a, whatchamacallit, a redfish. I've seen some people do dots along here for texture along the fish, the wet and wet. Even on these spines. Grab some yellow ochre for the eye. I'll come in with black in a moment. Grab some more yellow ochre for a little bit more color. I'm just going to go straight Payne's Gray, golly, for just a little bit more accentuation. The fin alongside the body, raw sienna, burnt sienna. That might be too long, not sure. But then I'll get that Payne's Gray, and I talked about the shadow that it would cast against the body, so let's try to get that there. Behind the gill. It comes across here. It was just more textural lines. Okay, let's look around the eye socket. A little bit more kind of a ochre, yellow ochre mix in there. We get lighter highlights around the gills. It may not be wet enough to lift, but we'll see. Texture. That ochre. Mouth. Might as well just grab a little bit of light red oxide, or I could just do burnt sienna for right in here. We do a pause for a quick dry off so we can kind of see everything that's taken place. Okay, now that we're dried off, let's grab the #1 rigger, mix a dark ultramarine blue and the raw burnt sienna. I don't know why I keep on saying raw. So there's the eye. Start accentuating these lines. Try not to pass directly over it, but to kind of get that effect where we'll have that dark and it'll be accentuated by the shadow underneath. A little bit of Payne's gray in there. Since we're in a drier stage, it'll dry darker. These little spines. Apologize if my hand's getting in the way. Those lines that I've been talking about for the scales. And kind of working a little bit offset from those lines. So you've seen me do it 3 times in this painting. I'm trying to figure out the right stage to do it in, or controlling the wet and wet, which would help create more depth. The side fin has blended in quite a bit, so a little bit ultramarine, but more burnt sienna. The black dot on the back. Accentuation of the eye socket. Some wet and wet into this fin. So I think personally I have a long way to go with these fish paintings, but with practice I think they'll be a viable thing to add to the repertoire, the bag of tricks. Now some people had recommended splattering around as well, so we have the light wash. We could take a dark and splatter in some areas. Just so we could see how that looks. Other people suggested some kind of more fishing type elements around it. I was thinking maybe hands, like holding the fish up, like if it was being displayed. Let's see where we're at. Let's do a quick dry off. Okay, so we have it all dried off. We did our splattering. I push the fish as much as I want to for this one. However, now I want to get super experimental and have the outline of hands holding this fish in place. So I mentioned how I kind of crowdsourced, asked questions of what I can do to these fish paintings to make them seem less flat, make it seem like just less of a dead fish sitting there. And some of the things were the wash, the salt, the splatter, and then I had thought, maybe just gestural marks for a hand or an arm holding that fish in place. And this might be completely ruining this, but it's all about experimenting. Trying to think of the motions. Of the hands. Just going to grab some raw yellow ochre, some vermilion, it's kind of a flesh tone, cobalt blue, lift it to lighten it. It's kind of doing like a shirt effect. Okay, so it made it more modern looking with the quick gestures of the hands. I think, unfortunately, the quality of this quick gestures do detract from the fish itself, but it's something that needed to be explored. So we can think about different ways to help these fish sit in place. We'll do a dry off. So I think it would help to see it from the standpoint of being matted and how everything would sit. I am going to adjust the camera angle for a moment and look at it and come up with some ideas. Okay. So there we are with a border around it to kind of get an idea. I think with something like this, the gestural marks for the hands and the body, if they were to be included, it would have to be really exploited in that fast and loose style in order to allow the effect to look reasonable. So I think there is some viability there. But the experiment needed to be done so that we can see ideas taking place. Bring up the neck right here just in case it was framed for some reason, you know. I think backgrounds of maybe just a cobalt blue for more of a sky would help. And then maybe mixing that cobalt blue with lemon yellow. See if we can get like a watery green background behind, kind of blocking in a water texture, kind of just letting these guys sit a little bit more in place. Would make that interesting as well. So there's a lot to be gleaned here, to be learned from all this. In fact, insofar as talking about the exploitation of the gestural marks, we can do that. We can do that shirt down the middle with buttons, just to allow that to take place. Anywho, I hope you enjoy. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you would like to see. I'll do more of these fish paintings with more experiments around them. Kind of not moving away from landscapes, but trying to add other things to the channel and other experiments. So I hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk to y'all soon.